You're one of the Twitterati.
God, yeah, you are so
Aren't
one
you?
of the Twitterati.
You're definitely, yeah. Go on, admit it.
Well,
Confess.
I certainly do a lot of tweeting. Or I'll do my best. Cause you've got to ask me, then I'll have to see what I can come up with. You know what I'm saying? And they refer to him as a juggling thunder.
Yes. This Scotland voted to stay, you witless you weasel-headed it. Yeah, something that's a weapons-grade plum. Or, weapons-grade numpty or something like that. Epic Trump insults.
Do you want to know how technology will fundamentally impact your life in the next 5 to 10 years? Then wonder no more, as our 28th episode guest is Dave Lane, open source president and technology guru and guide. Kia ora, I'm David Binstead, and I'm joined by regular co-host Jaya Gibson to boldly dive into conversation with innovators, creatives and social enterprises from Aotearoa, New Zealand. We're honoured to welcome our first president, who exiled himself willingly to New Zealand via Seattle and Lincoln, New Zealand around the millennium. By day, he's big on doing open source software stuff for himself and for the good of others. By night, he's busy doing music, building fantastic flying machines, swing dancing, making yoga poses, and baking sourdough, all when he's not being a doting father to 2 sons and hubby to an indulgent wife. Despite spending a lot of his time being cross at the half-assed way that many people do things, he's on a benevolent mission to try and fix the world through open source education innovation. President of the Open Source Society of New Zealand for the last 5 years, twice podcast, very pleased to welcome the erudite, learned force for good that is Mr. Dave Lane.
That eclipses anything else I was going to say.
I don't know.
Thank you kindly for that intro.
Yeah, and in a break from tradition, instead of a traditional opening question, we've got a short slang quiz for you to partake.
So, if I was to say that whip is real tight, my man, what would tight mean?
That whip is real tight.
Yeah.
Tight. It probably means good.
Correct.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
If I said to you, honestly, just chill out, Scrap. Hey, honestly, just chill out, Scrap. I don't know. Honestly, I suck at accents. I suck at my own accent.
You've got a great accent. I wish I could do your accent.
Right. Come on. What does that mean then?
Chill out, Scrap. That just
Scrap.
means take it easy, mate. That means quiet down, settle down.
Yeah, that's right. Ding. But Scrap, to a close friend, Scrap is a close friend.
See, when I was a kid, my dad used to refer to there was one kid on my soccer team when I was in sort of little league soccer, and there was one kid who was about 2/3 the size of all the other kids, but he ran rings around everybody. My dad always used to refer to him as Scrappy, and that was a good thing. Whereas here in New Zealand, apparently, if you called someone Scrappy, that would not necessarily.
In Scotland, Scrappy means you're a bit punchy. You like to fight.
You're pugilistic.
Yeah. Yes,
right.
Pugilistic. I love that word, pugilistic.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that one too.
Yes.
My dad described episode 26 as a bit scrappy.
Right.
I don't
Really?
think he meant it as a compliment.
Right. Okay.
But to be fair, it was a bit.
I know. From back in my days in East End London, I know a few boxers, and if you called them a pugilist, you would get the blunt end of their skills, let's say.
Yeah. Is that because they didn't understand what you were talking
Exactly.
about? Yeah, right. Okay.
Exactly. How dare you?
Yeah.
I'm not a kiddly fiddler. Right, so you got one more. I'm trying. Why are you acting like a thirst bucket, bro?
Thirst bucket?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've actually heard that one.
It means to act overly desperate.
All right.
Or, bro, why are you acting so thirsty? Which kind of means, to act desperate.
Final one just to redeem to get 3 out of 4.
Spaz?
Spaz.
She spazzed out on some dude at the club last night?
Yeah, well, that's just like wigging out, or I don't know how. There's basically
Sort of
throwing a wobbly.
Yeah.
Ding.
To get violent or confrontational. It says.
Yeah.
Spitting the dummy.
I think that counts as an.
I've had to acclimate to all of the Britishisms that are the mainstays of Kiwi slang, but
yeah, it's interesting. There's wee things here and there.
Oh, you Indian American Scotsman, you.
Yes. Yes.
Dave, it's really great that you can come and join us this afternoon. We will get into talking a bit about technology, which is kind of where we're hanging around, I think, at the minute. Just give us a really brief summary overview how your last few days have been going professionally.
Crikey. Well, we are in the throes of getting our massive organization is going to be having there are two of us, are going to be having a partner meeting in Scotland with our 35 university and other tertiary institution partners. And so we're preparing my other colleague is preparing the program, and I'm preparing some presentations of the technology tool set that we have been using to help our partners develop course materials, tertiary course materials. And so it's been very busy.
And this is the Open Education Resource Universitas.
That's right.
Universitas,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, it's a long story as to why it has that name, but you can call it the OERU for short.
Excellent. Just give us a quick summary of what that is and what it does.
Okay, so I like to say that we are, and I don't know if this would be seen as a compatible view with my other colleagues, but this is the way I see it. We are trying to quietly and benevolently revolutionize a sector which very desperately needs to be revolutionized, and we are trying to give technology away. Give education at the tertiary level a way to benefit from the incredible bounty that digital information and the internet's ability to transfer it affords. And the idea is that we are trying to get existing tertiary institutions to recognize that they can increase their reach around the world by, rather than tightly guarding the materials that they develop for teaching their courses, so their curriculum materials and so on, which are typically copyrighted and composed independently and reinvented by every institution, instead by sharing them and licensing them in a way that allows others to benefit from them, so that the level everyone can use at any institution is raised. And a pleasant byproduct of that is that anybody who has access to the internet, if these are open resources, can then also study them as a learner as opposed to as an educator.
One of the things I'm really interested in asking briefly about before we get into our first refreshment, conscious, really thirsty work talking into a microphone.
It is very thirsty. Whew.
Yeah. But what was your earliest recollection of computing and technology? Like, what was the first time you thought, oh, this is a bit weird or interesting or good?
That's a good question. When I was early in high school, so I would have been about probably 13, 14, the first Commodore 64s came out. And I was doing a lot of leaf raking and snow shoveling and hedge trimming and grass mowing and babysitting and things like that. And I managed to earn enough to buy a Commodore 64. And one of the ways that I decided to leverage that, because I wanted to play video games, let's be honest. But one of the ways that I leveraged that was by, in my high school English class, we had every week we got vocabulary words that we had to go home and look up in the dictionary and define. And then we had to learn the definitions of them, and then we were quizzed on them later in the week. And I found that I actually kind of enjoyed that stuff. I like words, and I didn't mind doing that. So I would sit down and do that the night that the assignment was given out, and then I would use my computer to type it up, and I would print out a dozen or a couple dozen copies of it, and I'd sell it to my classmates for 25 cents each. And so it helped defray the cost of the computer and of games and so on. And that was the first time that I actually could see that a computer could work for me.
Mom and Dad gave me my first computer, ZX Spectrum 81, when I was 9, and I got right into BASIC right away.
Nice. Yeah.
And that's, I was so, the games disappointed me hugely. I was much more impressed by the things I could do with it. The ZX Spectrum was cool. I mean, it was a perfect, emphasis of my color theory. So it was black. It was a black case with soft rubber keys, but then I had a little rainbow in the corner.
Nice.
What was your first computer, David? How old were you?
I had was it the Atari?
Yeah.
Atari 520 or something?
With a membrane keyboard? No, that would have been after your time. That was my day.
Proper keyboard, but integrated into the sort of the floppy drive on the side and plugged it into the TV. Yeah, that was my first computer.
Oh, right, one of those. Yes.
Why is technology important now? Why should people care about technology, as you two obviously and clearly do?
I can tell you one reason. Because there are lots of things in human history that have gone in cycles, right? And just about all of our history has gone in cycles. Things like our knowledge as a race has gone in cycles, and we've then had come to some sort of, like the Dark Ages were a time when a lot of the previous knowledge from the halcyon days of the Greeks and various other civilizations were largely lost as a result of human avarice and infighting and various other things. And I'm sure cycles like that we don't even know about occurred in prehistory.
Yeah.
And the thing about technology is that it is really the first era in human history where things are actually new, where humanity has a chance to grow out of the patterns, the codependent, disastrous patterns that it's had throughout its history until now. So, like, we are now creating something that exists beyond us, and the thing that humanity stays the same throughout, more or less. But the thing that's changing is our ability to communicate with each other and use these technologies to augment what we as a race can do.
Are you sort of pointing towards transhumanism? Is that what you'd say?
Well, I think that's the logical extension of it, but that's not necessarily what I'm saying. I mean, I'm just saying that by using these tools, we have the potential to change the patterns that we've experienced throughout our existence, and in a hopefully positive way. We also have the potential to change them in a negative way. So it's not implicitly or inherently good, but it has the potential to be good if it's used wisely.
At the risk of delaying delicious beverages.
Careful.
I've been fascinated with artificial intelligence. I guess pre Blade Runner. I think that's when it really piqued my interest. But there's a project called Open AI that certain people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and all these guys that are investing. It's a non-profit artificial intelligence research organization who are doing, like you say, like there are those who say that the AI can benefit humanity, and like Ray Kurzweil, he's all like, it's all going to be a utopia, and then you've got Elon Musk sort of saying, well, if we don't, maybe Stephen Hawking is probably more negative about it, and he says we're all, better watch out. We're all gonna be taken over by robots, sort of thing. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it can go either way, really. I think that we're kidding ourselves if we. There are a lot of people out there who say, "Oh, no, there's nothing to worry about. We're smarter than the machines," and I'm actually not at all convinced that that's the case. But having said that, I'm also not convinced that people are all that smart by and large. So yeah, it's one of those situations. It's a little bit like Trump for president. It's like maybe Trump for president would be a horrible, horrible thing, but maybe it's the only thing that will snap a large portion of the world out of its stupor of complacency,
right. Yeah,
and force them to actually grow a pair and actually learn how to actually work out what's valuable.
But isn't the thing with this? The scary thing about AI is, like, once the cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in again. That kind of thing.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah, Van Neumann has a lot to answer to. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Please explain to us about Van Neumann.
Van Neumann came up with the idea of building machines that know how to build themselves. Mm-hmm. So self-replicating things. Yeah. So they have in their kind of artificial DNA, they have the knowledge that's necessary to build the things that allow them to fabricate more themselves. A kind of a proof of concept version of that in the current day is the RepRap, if you've heard of that. The 3D printers that are used to make themselves, that use their own capabilities, plus a few generic materials like steel rods and stuff. They're
not completely replicable.
No.
I'm going to interject because we've got some very old technology sitting in 2 bottles right in front of us.
See, fermenting is a technology that needs a lot more attention, I think, and it's getting it. It's actually starting to get it.
Yeah, our 2 brews, a bit of a combination, but in the spirit of open source, which we'll come on to talking a little bit more about in a second, a sense of working together for the benefit of all rather than just the benefit of one. So between Modern Times and 8 Wired, they've produced halfway to Whangarei, or do you pronounce it Whangarei?
I pronounce it Whangarei.
It's WH is Whangarei. I think this is one of the places where they argue about it a lot. So, can you describe this beer to us? You know,
I certainly can. Yeah, I would say that it's got a bit of a skunk, which is something I say as a token of affection. A good Pilsner typically has a bit of a skunky initial smell. It hits it hits your olfactory sensors. It hits it, with a reasonable, something sort of pungent, but it's a very kind of pleasant and transitory thing. It's quite. I haven't tried it yet, actually, I have to say, but it's quite citrusy in its feel. It sort of has that little bit of that. So it feels quite a light. It looks quite a light looking beer, quite fresh.
All right, we'll let you drink some. What about you, Jaya?
Everything he said. But a bit sour on the front.
It's missing something, actually.
Yeah, it's a bit.
It attacks on the tip of the tongue, but it doesn't finish very
this is
fully.
A grisette. What's a grisette when it's at home?
Described to me by our beer library expert Garth as a bit funky, not quite a sour.
Right, that's agreeable. I think it's definitely a summer beer. It is an outside in the hot sun beer. A bit too sour for my liking.
It has the. I mean, maybe it's sourness, but it has the. There's something unsatisfying about it. The same way, to my mind, that sparkling water isn't thirst quenching.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It sits on your tongue, but it kind of almost goes around your palate in a way. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's a good description. What would you say, David?
I'm slightly confused by it, to be honest.
That's hilarious.
Pardon me.
The initial tasting, I actually quite liked it, but the more I'm drinking, the less I'm actually liking it.
I'm actually going in the opposite direction because now it seems to have soaked in, and now it's actually leaving an impression, as opposed to the first time when it felt like it's kind of like water on a greasy something. It just kind of runs around it, off it.
It wasn't settling on the taste buds, whereas now we're getting some
some traction. Yeah. But yeah, I think I'd probably I wouldn't go back for seconds, probably.
No, fair enough.
But it's not unpleasant.
Quick view, Dave, of the label design and sort of bottle presentation.
Sure. Well, it's a typical New Zealand brown bottle with a yellowy kind of dilapidated paint effect with yellow on light yellow, and it's got a few blues in the rest of the label, so light blues and dark blues with the 8 Wired brand and the Modern Times beer brand, which for some reason didn't strike me as a brand the same way that the Wired one did, but that's not really to do with the beer. And it's, I'd say it's a okay effort for labeling, but I wouldn't.
All right, Jai, cut loose.
It's not terrible.
It's not as bold as a Panhead, of course, which I have to say I admire. I admire them for their boldness.
I'm not too fond of blue and yellow as a color scheme. Marks out of 5, I'm going to give it 2 out of 5.
Yeah,
that's just below average.
Yeah, with 0 being excellent and 5 being terrible.
What marks out of 5 are you going to give it, Dave?
I would give it probably. I've had some really bad beers, so I'd give it a 2 as well.
Okay. That's good. You know that theory of the wisdom of crowds, right? You know, like you get 100 people to guess how many jelly beans are in the jar, and if you take all of their wild guesses, from 15,000 to 40, that when you divide them by the average, they almost always guess right. So whatever I mean, there's only 3 of us here. We only need 97 more to get an accurate rating of the beer. But what I'm saying is, whatever you're feeling is all good.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Right. So David, come on, out of 5.
I'm going to be generous and go 2.5.
All right, straight down.
I'm going to give it 2.5 because I like the shape of the bottle.
All right, interesting.
And although the beer doesn't really hugely speak to me,
it is a nice shape of a bottle. I'll give you that.
actually thought about what they're doing. Garth had it in the sort of Lambics, Belgian area, and because of that...
It almost has the lambic nose to it, but it doesn't follow through with the taste.
Loosely speaking, our first topic, open source.
Yeah.
What is open source?
Yeah, what's open source all about, mate?
Oh, my. So there are lots and lots of nuances to this whole area. I'll try to keep it as general as I can and then maybe refine it slightly as we go. Open source software is a tradition of making software in a very young industry, whereby people who write software, who refer to themselves, if they're good, they self-deprecatingly refer to themselves as hackers. The idea is to scratch your own itch with software. So people who have a problem for which they can envisage a software-based solution. So say, for example, you like your beers and you've got a long list of beers and you want to be able to keep track of your collection of beer bottles and make sure that they stay, in some kind of order. You want to be able to call up the exact beer based on a flavor profile that you've written down on a piece of paper. You might write a piece of software that allows you to rapidly look up beers based on flavor profile, and people have done this. Now, in the world of open source software, the idea is that people don't preciously guard their recipe. They don't try to make their recipe secret so they can exclusively benefit from the taste that they've generated or whatever the software is they've generated. They instead give everyone the recipe, make it available for anyone. In fact, they even give them instructions on how to buy the right kit to brew the same beer, as it were. They explain to them how to download the source code of the software and to make it do exactly what they want. And they invite other people to improve on it or to take it in a completely different direction that might also be interesting, with the idea that the original developer will only benefit from any changes or improvements or changes in direction that other people might make. That might also be interesting, but maybe never occurred to that original developer. So the idea is that it empowers everyone who uses software to be a developer of the software, should they choose. It creates no barriers. In fact, it does nothing but enable people who use software to say, actually, this software is really cool, but it doesn't do what I want it to do. Or I can imagine another thing this could do with a small tweak that I never would have envisaged, or I never would have bothered writing it myself. But since I have this software that I can build upon, it's only a minor tweak to what is already there in front of me, so maybe I will do it. A lot of open source software never gets looked at by anybody, most of it. But occasionally you'll find something that hits a nerve, and suddenly you have the Firefox browser, or you have the Linux kernel, which is the single greatest piece of human engineering, arguably, in the history of the world.
Because those mostly are servers, rather than...
No.
Why is that?
Every Android phone.
Right.
Which is growing faster than any other platform, even if you aggregate all the other platforms together. Right. Android is growing faster.
Just very quick to compare and contrast with proprietary or closed software.
Yeah.
What's the difference there in simple terms?
So proprietary and closed are synonymous in my lexicon. So in the proprietary world, software is created by a small group, typically of developers, who choose to only make available the functionality of the software, not the code or the recipe that makes the software. And typically you buy software, you buy a collection of ones and zeros in some form. Either you download it on the internet, or in the old days you would get it on a CD in a box, and you would get an activation code with it, typically. And that activation code was the mechanism of what we refer to as artificial scarcity. Because people in the old days used to sell software the same way they sold toasters or cars or other physical things, as something that was inherently scarce, where in fact software is inherently abundant because it's a digital thing. You can transfer it. You can transfer it in its entirety in ones and zeros.
As the music industry is finding to its cost.
Yes. Well, in some ways it's finding it to its renaissance. I mean, the existing establishment of music is finding it to its cost because it was too slow to recognize it.
Before we stray too far, give the obvious example of what, as opposed to Android phones, what's the proprietary alternative? So
a proprietary alternative to Android is Apple.
The iPhone. And so basically what happens with proprietary software, I'll just wear my heart on my sleeve. Proprietary software is, in my opinion, not inherently evil. It just tends to it almost always. Yeah, for sure.
And the reason for that is that there's a massive establishment of convention and legislation and policy that is designed to protect the interest of large entities, namely companies like Apple and Microsoft and Google and various others that are household names, that are in fact the biggest corporate entities that have ever existed in the history of humanity. They are taking advantage of something that's called the network effect, and they are also taking advantage of something, this concept of artificial scarcity, to make scarce something that's inherently or naturally abundant.
It was something that I, cognitive dissonance. So I displayed a lot of that through my Apple purchasing years.
They run Linux very nicely.
Yes, they do.
They took Linux open source and
then closed it.
And did a fork and closed it.
Well, strictly it wasn't Linux, but yes, they did. They used something that was like Linux. It was the Mach 32 kernel, which is a BSD licensed. So the Linux kernel, they couldn't legally do that with because of the license that it was made available under, which was what's called a copyleft license, which says if you modify this, you must make it available on the same terms as the people who made it available to you initially did, if that makes sense. So it's a reciprocal license. The Apple, their lawyers wouldn't let them use that because that would have meant that they would have had to give away their improvements to it as well. And instead, they used another open source, but a much lesser open source kernel, which is like the core of an operating system, called the Mach 32 kernel, which came out of a family of operating systems called the BSD Unix family. And they are licensed under what's referred to as a permissive, from a business's point of view, a permissive license, not from a user's point of view. And those do not require that if you change the software which has been given to you freely, you can in turn exploit it in a closed way. So you can take it, change it, and then the product of your change can be not made available under the same terms. So it's the license under which Linux is licensed, you could also call a share-alike license, whereas the way that Apple did it was an exploit what others have shared for your own personal profit license.
Yeah, and concentrating the wealth in fewer and fewer hands, in effect.
It's basically like, it would be like having a public park in which there were truffles growing and picking all the truffles before anyone else could get access to them, and then making something that you could sell and no one else was allowed to sell. So that you're essentially harvesting from the commons and you're exploiting the commons for your own personal gain without contributing much back.
I have a love-hate relationship with Apple, which is more bordering on the hate as time goes on, to be honest. Yeah, even at that young age, I knew that there was something not quite right with this. And as I've gotten older, it just makes me more and more angry.
The velvet handcuffs are so comfortable.
Yes, that's right. They are. And it's so hard. I know, I sort of like, my heart wishes that there was we had the alternatives in Linux that we have available today. I'm so dependent on Adobe Cloud, for example, that it's just not possible for me to move to Linux without causing huge complications, for my professional life.
But that's a self-imposed complication, unfortunately.
Well, not really. If the industry standard is...
It's not an industry standard. It's a commercial proprietary standard. If you are in business, if you create a business, and your business requires some material or product or supply that you can only get from a single other supplier, and you don't own that supplier, you are not actually a business. You are a subsidiary, a non-voting subsidiary of that supplier, because they can at any time say, well, actually, we're not going to make that thing anymore, or we're not going to supply that thing to you, or we're going to triple your prices. And at that point, your business ceases to be viable instantly. And the reality is that every single government in the world that I'm aware of, every single school system, just about every business, just about every individual has allowed themselves. Now, there are mitigating factors to a point, but they have essentially all made themselves dependent on companies like Apple, Adobe, and Microsoft, to the point where if those companies tell them how much they're going to pay for the next year's installment of Office 365, those governments and those universities and those businesses will pay because they have no other choice. They have built themselves into a situation where they are fundamentally incapable of operating as a business without paying that extortion.
But here's the rub for me. Okay, it's like, why should the person on the street care? I obviously know the answer, but I'm just interested in the view. It's like, why is it important that here we are predominantly talking about the high level view of why technology is important, but the person on the street's like, doesn't affect me.
It does affect them every day, all the time.
So just give us that view as to why it is so important.
Well, I mean, most people. So there's a whole lot of things that I get very cross about the way that the world is now, and it's very unfair, and it's very. It's one of these situations that all of those people out there for whom they think someone out there understands what's going on, and someone out there is looking out to make sure that things are just and kind and benevolent and so on. Those unfortunate people living under that very comforting fiction are unfortunately typically digging themselves a deeper hole every day. They click I accept without a second thought, but they don't realize what they're giving up in doing so. And what they're giving up there is essentially their soul. They are effectively saying, one, I don't hold the corporation that produced this software, I don't even hold them accountable for this software doing what it says it will do on the box. In fact, I can't hold them responsible for it if it completely destroys every piece of data that I own and hold dear. They can use all of the material that I provide to them in any way they see fit. I've indemnified them against any claim that I could possibly make against them for anything. But the reality is that every student at school that creates Microsoft Word documents or PowerPoint slides or Adobe files and so on. And so essentially our school system is essentially indenturing our students to these corporations that exist for the sole purpose of maximizing the money they extract from us. And the reality is the only force that compensates or balances against that is the open source world.
I understand and I agree with everything you're saying, but there's the commercial reality that I live within. That if I want to get my files to the printer and from the client to me,
I'm an unreasonable man.
You are, and I'm not going to let you off the hook. I think you're one of the best advocates I've ever met for open source, but I'm going to counteract and say that I find that your views, especially in this regard, lean far too extreme. Okay. I think that one of the problems with open source is that it's so far to the other side. We need to find the kind of happy medium. I believe some things should be free. Sure, it's great, but not everything. And it certainly.
No, I certainly don't believe everything should be free either. It's the disconnect between value and money that is the problem I have. And
sure. I agree, and I agree, and I'm all for an alternative, and I'm all for open standards. But
you have to vote with your wallet, otherwise it never happens.
Well.
So Bertrand Russell, I believe it was Bertrand Russell who said that it is unreasonable as an individual to think that the world will change to suit you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is therefore only the only reason that the world ever changes is because of unreasonable people.
Yeah, I'd put my brother in that camp. He's determined to change India.
A few years ago, New Zealand would award people patents on software. Now, something you may or may not know. So in other parts of the world, most spectacularly in America, they will offer software patents for just about anything. And the patent agencies, if you're familiar with patents, you have to meet 3 criteria. One is that you're not patenting something that someone else has created prior to you, so prior art. You're not doing something that is obvious to someone who is skilled in whatever art is relevant to the thing that you've developed. So if you're patenting a software algorithm, for example, that someone in the software industry who is skilled in the art, whatever that means, wouldn't see that as obvious. It has to be something clever, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be something useful, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the patent assessors around the world, are typically fresh out of university people who have not had experience doing much of anything. They might have a bit of book learning, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But they're not going to be skilled in any art.
Yeah.
Much less software, which changes very rapidly. And in fact, if you were employed full-time as a software assessor, you would very rapidly become no longer skilled in the art because you have to run to stand still in the software industry.
Yeah.
So the reality is that you will never get good quality patents being granted because the patent office doesn't even bother to apply those criteria unless someone contests an application. And the only reason someone will contest an application, or the only way they can contest it, is if they know that the application has been made and appreciate that basically they have to sit there and read the patent applications 24/7 to be able to stop the ones that might infringe on the things that they are legitimately doing themselves, but not bothering to patent.
Yeah.
And so in New Zealand, in 2004, the Microsoft Corporation submitted a patent application. And that was to use, you've probably heard of something called XML.
Yep.
So XML is just a way of storing data in a structured form that provides semantic information related to the field. So it's effectively like a way of codifying a form of information. 2004, Microsoft submitted a patent for using XML to store document information. That was their patent.
Right.
The only reason it wasn't granted was because a few people that belonged to this little organization that had just started a couple of years, or the year before, called the Open Source Society, just happened to get tipped off by somebody, I forget who, that this was happening. And
in effect, they were trying to privatize something which was previously available to all for free.
Exactly.
I mean, to summarize.
And to be able to control it. So essentially, they could be the gatekeeper about who else could use this and the crazy thing was that it had been used extensively by open source software for 4 or 5 years prior. But the fact that the New Zealand Patent Agency was going to grant the patent was an indictment of them as an agency rather than, and also of Microsoft for being so, things like prior art are universal if it exists in one context. So essentially, they should have, if they were an ethical company, they would have withdrawn their application, having accepted that in fact prior art had been established. But they were hoping to get it under the radar and no one would notice.
Patents are essentially the antithesis to open source.
We were told, as a few years ago in 2012, I think, there was a move in New Zealand to reinvent the patent legislation.
Right.
And very surprisingly to many people involved in the legislative process, this group of software developers presented at all the select committees meetings saying that we want software to be unpatentable in New Zealand.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And it completely flabbergasted them. And the lawyers who make their living off of patent infringement lawsuits and advising companies on getting patents and so on for their software absolutely spat the dummy.
Well, of course, they would have gone green.
And they went absolutely mental. And they were talking, they were poo-pooing us. They were starting up blog sites just to simply to provide a counterpoint, so quote unquote balance to this view that these wingnut software developers, what do they know about software? These software developers who mounted this effort to get software patents banned in New Zealand. And we were told by everyone that we were being incredibly unreasonable.
Dave, would you honour us with a second brew? And I'd be really grateful as well if you'd just give it a quick introduction as well.
Sure. Okay, this is Townsend Aotearoa Pale Ale. There's a 5% alcohol content.
Just while you're pouring those out, one of the very funniest conversations I had with my partner at lunchtime today, in fact, was talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes.
Just give us a quick overview of what that is and why you mentioned it in the show notes.
Sure. So this is one of my favorite things, and in fact, John Cleese from Monty Python, most of you will probably be familiar with him. He did a very funny YouTube video that briefly explains what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, and essentially, it is the idea. There are two sides to the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it was an effect identified and described by these two researchers, Dunning and Kruger, and it is about the idea. One of its common names is imposter syndrome. So it's the idea that many very clever people, often women, will not put themselves forward for really difficult or high pressure or high responsibility roles because they don't feel that they are capable of doing those things, because they can envisage all the ways in which it could all go horribly wrong. And it is in fact that very sense of introspection and awareness that makes them ideally suited to those kinds of roles. And in fact, it is the people who are not smart enough to realize how badly they could fail and say, oh yeah, I'll give that a go. It is those people who, and this is how John Cleese puts it, those people who are literally too stupid to realize how stupid they are, because to understand how dumb you are requires a certain amount of intelligence. it's like the bravado of young children who think they can do anything just because they saw someone do it on TV. It's to a certain extent, it's that my boy talks about how he's an expert marksman because he saw somebody using a gun somewhere on TV. And he's 7, but yeah, it's these kind of things that.
So the whole initial impressions, folks.
It has a really nice pale ale top note and kind of malty and roasty. What do you say, Dave?
I think it's quite a pleasant drop. It wouldn't be my favorite of its class, although I say that there's very little complaint I'd have over it. I think there's just a few that might be a little bit brighter in there.
It has actually been a while since we've had anything with PA in it. So
yeah, it's only 5%.
Yeah,
Kiwi has.
It's interesting.
As it says on the bottle, which almost inherently
the design
makes
is definitely not Kiwi as. It's kind of some kind of weird 50s, 60s retro.
No, my band is called 3KG.
So
we're a bunch of lightweights. Yeah, it's a long story, but
style of music.
Yeah, we refer to ourselves as an eclectic. We do mostly covers, but we like to think that we either wallow in or generally eschew cliche. So we either do things that are so cliche that they're kind of funny, we hope, or they're the kind of thing that you probably would have. It would either be the kind of stuff that you would like, but you'd never heard before, or maybe you think to yourself, "Oh yeah, I remember that song. That was a really good song, but whatever happened to it?" kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's our kind of. It seems to be the way we've evolved.
So we have to do the scores. Absolutely. David, you first this time.
I'm going to go for a nice solid 4 for this. What I like about it, really solid and enjoyable. It's not easy drinking. It's a quality drink. How about you, John?
Yeah, I guess I'm being so underwhelmed by such crappy label design. I'm taking this one as a good thing. Yes, I really like this beer. But it's not, it's not stellar, so it's a 4.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'd probably give it a 3.9 just to be difficult.
Okay.
Because there's
such unreasonable.
Contrary, Dave.
Proliferation of pale ales, American and Aotearoa and India and various other forms of pale ale that it's such a crowded field that you have to really be exemplary to stand out, I think. Yeah, so I'm just recognizing the weight of the industry.
So tell us, explain to our listeners what the singularity is.
Well, different people the term has been somewhat co-opted, similarly to the term open source. Computers, for many thousands of years, have been hovering right around that 0 mark for intelligence. And starting with the adding machines in the late 1800s, which made IBM started IBM's rocketing off to fame and various other things. The curve started to grow back in the late Industrial Revolution, and then with the advent of the transistor, well, first the vacuum tube and then the transistor and so on, in the 1950s and the 1960s and 1970s, the curve steepened, and eventually it became clear something called Moore's law. So one of the founders of Intel Corporation Mr. Moore described this concept that every 18 months, the amount of space or the number of processors, or effectively the number of calculations per square centimeter of chip halves. So the number of processors you can get into a square centimeter doubles every 18 months, and the price of that doubled computation halves over the previous one. So effectively, every 18 months, you get 4 times the computing power per dollar. Right? So that's quadrupling. So that's a classic exponential growth curve. And so the logical extension of that growth curve, if you assume that intelligence is a function of the number of calculations that you can perform, at some point, that curve, because it's rapidly rising, will cross the flat line of human intellect. And the point at which those two cross is seen as being the singularity. Now, you can predict with relatively high confidence when that's going to happen based on the fact that the growth curve that has been experienced since time immemorial is a textbook exponential curve. So if you follow that mathematically along and you anticipate where it will cross the human intelligence line, we should be hitting it somewhere between 5 years from now and 10 years from now.
So what's going to happen in between 5 and 10 years' time? What difference is the archetypal person in the street going to really notice?
Well, we're already hearing a lot of rumblings about it. Things like driverless vehicles. I mean, what is it? 30 or 40% of employed people today are in some way, shape, or form a driver. I mean, it's some absurd amount of the current workforce is employed to just move stuff around and to hold the wheel of a vehicle and keep it from running into stuff.
Nothing wrong with being a cycling holdout.
But I think the really scary thing for people is, I mean, that's the stuff that people can latch on to. That's the low-lying fruit, if you like, about the...
Well, that's actually a really difficult problem. There's a lot of...
ramifications of...
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't got... Let me go where I'm going.
Yeah, sure.
So, you've got, I'm a lawyer. Oh, I'm an accountant. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a, X insert profession here. That's not going to affect me because there's no way a computer can do what I can do.
I'm a creative.
I'm a creative. All that sort of stuff.
I'm employed for my mind.
I'm employed for, my ability to think abstractly. A computer could never do that. Well, I've got news for you, man. 5 to 10 years, lawyers, accountants, you name it, creatives.
Well, as William Gibson famously said, the future is already here. It's just not very well distributed.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, the thing about technology is that it can go from existing in one place to existing pervasively in our society in a time that was never, ever in the history of the world possible before. Uber went from zero to ubiquitous in a year. I'm cautiously optimistic about most disruptions because usually disruptions remove massive inefficiencies in our world, but at the same time,
they're removing a lot of tax from our GDP as well.
They also do, yes. Like Apple, for example.
Yeah. Isn't this the heart of the matter, though? That in terms of singularity, exponential change, that the inefficiency in the world is the human.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore in 5 or 10 years' time, when we reach the point that, quote, the machines take over in sci-fi parlance, that the human becomes superfluous.
It will happen. There's no question in my mind.
How does the human, the poor organic creature, now prepare for that near future?
Well, there's a couple ways.
Drink beer?
Well, I mean, I think we're already seeing whispers of it in things like guaranteed minimum income or guaranteed
UBI.
UBIs.
Universal
benefit. Thank you.
Yeah. Universal basic income.
Basic income. Thank you. I mean, those are the kinds of things that will have to happen, I suspect, in order for there not to be carnage and to return to the dark ages, essentially.
So there's 2 points here, right? So first one is at the start of the Industrial Revolution, some of the genuinely altruistic pioneers of that believed that they were doing humanity, society a service. They were like, great, we can cut down labor and people can have more leisure time, right? And so some of them were genuinely thinking like that.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, we might end up there. With a UBI and a transactional tax, and at least it's possible. That's the utopian version. The other thing, which I'm going to say quite controversially, which
that's so unlike you, Jaya.
Yeah, it's like doesn't matter if we're outclassed, if we're out evolutionized, if the new race is an AI race, and we're extinct, for want of a better word. Does it matter? Isn't that just how the universe evolves? What does it matter that human race exists? But for our own selfish, egotistical desire to stay around and be the superior being in this universe.
Well, yeah.
And a B part to that is there's a lot of talk about the fact that we're a simulation anyway.
Sure.
This is just the next level of simulation. Right, we're
gotta love the Matrix.
Yeah,
well, I mean,
as perfect example.
I hate to reference the Matrix because it's such a scrappy, sloppy rendition of it.
And we're not talking about the New York scrappy either.
Yeah, no.
Far more concise and interesting explanations of the fact that we live in a simulation. But as time goes on, there's real, I wouldn't say proof or evidence, but there is bordering on that we are living in a computer simulation, as it were. Please go.
Well, I mean, I think we have a lot of ways that we can choose to act in the approach to the singularity. Like, for example, there was talk this morning on the radio, on national radio. We're now getting to the point where we can start doing things like augment ourselves as people, so we can become part machine, and that's a very taboo discussion in many areas. Transhumanism and so on. And I think inevitably there will be some of that. There will always be some people. There already is that.
There already is that. Yeah.
But I mean, it's pretty brutal at the moment. but I suspect it won't take long before it's less brutal. But the other thing is, we have a lot of historically utopic novels, like, for example, Isaac Asimov wrote the Foundation series, which talked about the rules of robotics and so on. And I mean, we have those kind of rules for zones for DVDs as well. But the thing is that the knockoffs, the knockoffs that you get from other countries, it requires extra engineering to build those things in, just like it would require extra engineering to build the rules of robotics into a robot. And so inevitably, we'll always go, like entropy says, that we'll always produce things that don't meet that standard, and those things will be the things that kind of corrupt us. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, it's about the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
So how are you going to reassure my dad, who listens to this podcast, about what's going to be happening to me in 5 or 10 years' time?
Well,
brass tacks.
So yeah, I mean, my thinking is that we just need to enjoy every day to the fullest. I think that's something we need to be doing regardless. I think it'll be very interesting to see how a lot of people respond to the idea that robots don't value us as much as we didn't value certain creatures that we're making extinct.
Exactly.
And it'll be really interesting to see how they feel, and if they even recognize the fitting nature of that. But I think humans are pretty resilient, and I think there are way too many of us, and I think that the Earth. I have this sort of, I mean, I'm an atheist, quite happily to say that. Mm-hmm. But I believe that there is a certain level of consciousness in the planet. There's a lot of increasing understanding nowadays that different ecosystems are very capable of managing themselves in ways that are still very mysterious to us. And I believe that the Earth actually does things like evolve the things that will help it be sustainable, whether the things that are threatening that sustainability recognize it or accept it or not. I personally believe that things like the internet are the emergence of a global nervous system. Yeah. And that we're just like the cells in our body that make up a human body. A human body is made up of billions and billions of separate organisms. I mean, I think it's recently been disproved, but something like a quarter of our body mass is actually made up of bacteria.
Right.
That have nothing to do technically with being human. They're
that's right.
But the quarter of our mass. But I mean, the idea is that we are just like those little cells of bacteria as far as the Earth is concerned. And so who's to say that we're not at present at the birth of a new consciousness.
Exactly. Yeah.
That will come out of the internet, and maybe the brain will actually be an AI.
Yeah.
We live in disruptive times.
Well, we certainly live in scary ones.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, that's another dirty word I don't like, disruptive. You can stick your disruptive up your sharing economy. That's what I'm telling you. Just some friendly advice when you go to Inverness.
Yes.
If you come across someone that you might have an altercation with or a disagreement with in terms of simulations versus singularity theories, blah, blah, blah. Sure. You can call them a BAMpot.
A BAMpot.
BAM.
BAMpot.
A BAMpot.
Right.
Definition?
An idiot or unhinged person.
BAMpot.
Yeah. Or if you want to be alliterative and kind of superfluous with your verbiage, you can call them a Barry BAMpot, which means a glorious idiot.
All right, a Barry BAMpot.
A Barry BAMpot.
Dave, if there's one thing in your current life that you couldn't live without, what is it? What would it be?
No, you know what it would be? It would be the sense that there are at least a few people out there who are actually trying to do the right thing in the world.
Anything, Jaya, to add to the grand lexicon of things you can't live without?
Baffies. Slippers.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the Scottish slang for slippers.
Baffies.
Baffies.
Noted. Bampots, bally bampots and baffies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, David?
It's a bit of an obvious one, but I'm going to say the broad brushstroke that is technology. And not just because we've had a bit of a deep dive into a couple aspects of it this afternoon, but just that I think of its enabling effect in our everyday lives. Just the completely integrated, ubiquitous nature of technology to the majority of our lives. That time you realise is when you go bush, especially in New Zealand. No cell phone reception? Golly, what are we going to do? We're going to talk to each other and we're going to communicate in IRL, hashtag IRL. So, yeah.
There's never been a time before when the strange people that every community has could find their tribe the way that they can today. Now they can find their tribe in a way that never happened before. So we have the potential for inclusiveness, and we have the potential for every individual to reach a sort of their potential in some way that was never possible before.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Absolutely.
I really wish we could have you on for another 2 hours.
But we'll get shot by your partner and kids if we do.
We get very sloshed.
We'll have to have you back on to talk about online voting, because I think that's a really interesting thing. I think a lot of people would say, why is online voting bad? But that is not a question I'm not going to allow you to answer right now.
Okay. That I am referring directly to I am alluding to the Cacophony project. So, among other things, I've been engaged by Grant as the kind of open source coordinator for the Cacophony project, which is cacophony.org.nz. And that is essentially, we talked about Moore's Law before. It is effectively the idea that was hatched by what I would refer to as a hacker in the best sense, namely Grant and his son Cameron, as a way of essentially whooping predator ass with Moore's Law. And so the idea is, and Grant has written a rather compelling blog post. So on that Cacophony website I mentioned, there's a blog post which essentially says, in fact, it exactly says that we could be 80,000 times more effective in our pest control using stuff we already know right now.
Wow.
So that kind of makes that sort of leap in effectiveness makes the government, which I should make very explicit. I do not like our current government. I don't like it much at all. But
hi, John.
I do think. I despair a little bit at the alternatives as well. But their pledge to make New Zealand predator free apparently specifically mentioned the Cacophony project in the announcement for it. So that's a little bit heartening. Although I wish there was. I wish there was a broader acceptance of this idea of doing things in an open source community focused way, as opposed to a private maximizing profit sort of way.
Well, we're with you, man. Keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah. Where can we find you, Jai?
Geez, in real life only, bro. I keep it real.
You can find Jaya Gibson online anywhere the sun rises. You can find us at Twice
Even
Podcast.
where it doesn't rise.
Yes.
At Twice Podcast. Me at David _Binstead on Twitter. We're also playing around on Instagram a little bit these days. It just leaves me to thank hugely. It's been a real privilege to have Dave Lane on as our guest this afternoon.
Yeah, we get twice as much of you. There's no.
Well,
it's brilliant.
I'm honored that you proceeded with just one guest. I appreciate the discussion. It was good fun. No, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to. I'm honored that anybody's even willing to listen. So or converse. So thanks very much.
No, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Always got fascinating things to share. We'd love to have you on again as a future guest.
Yes, definitely.
Also to thank my co-host, Jaya Gibson.
And I'll thank you. Thanks, David.
And I'll thank you both.
No, there's lots of thank yous everywhere. Let's get out of here.
Oh, no.
This is Twice Podcast. Out of here.
Cheers.
I got lots of enthusiasms, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, okay, all right. Here's your first New York slang. This is an easy one. We're starting you off easy.
Okay.
So what does it mean to take it there?
Did you take it there?
Yeah.
Are you going to take it there?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not riding around in that hooptie bee.
Hooptie?
Hooptie.
Somebody calling somebody a hooptie. That's I haven't heard that in a long time.
That's a beaten down car.
If something is really hooped, it's basically, it means it's munted. It's
right.
The
That makes
Kiwi
sense.
slang equivalent would be munted.
Yeah, right. That's about right.
Something is, man, that's a hoopty ride, or something like that. And it can be used to describe people as well. Unfortunately, man, your date is hoopty. But I can tell you. Can I just tell you something? I was telling my boys this. This is really interesting. People in my band as well. I was telling. We were talking about white man's overbite, and we were also talking about being called white bread.
Oh,
because when I was a kid, in my school it was probably 50% African American and 50% not. Right. And so, if ever there was a school dance, disco or whatever, the kids would turn up, and there'd be some kids that would just be incredible dancers, natural dancers, and they would get out on the floor and they would just be strutting their stuff and had no problem. Most of them were African American because it was just something that they felt confident and comfortable doing. It was part of their social culture. And a lot of the white kids would do that too, except the difference was that they were really shit dancers.
Right.
And you'd have collections of often girls, African American girls, standing on the side of the dance, and they'd kind of be looking at each other and looking out at the dance floor, and you could hear them kind of saying to each other, "Man, that boy, he white bread."
Yeah.
Which basically meant you had no rhythm and no hope of ever being cool.
Oh dear.
And it was they who were the arbiters of cool. Right. When I was a kid. Oh. If you were white bread, it was over. That was you had no chance.
Interesting.
They called the shots as far as the social pecking order went.
Yeah.
And the other thing was they always talked about white man's overbite, which was when you saw somebody who was white trying to dance in a rhythmic sort of way. And apologies for the microphone zooming in and out because I'm trying to show how you would dance in a rhythmic sort of way. And they would go like this. And they'd bite their lower lip, and that was called white man's overbite because they had to do that in order to concentrate hard enough to stay on the beat. And the worst thing you could possibly do, this was social death. This was like you were a guaranteed Republican if you were ever caught doing this. When there was music playing in an auditorium, say, and everybody started clapping. If you clapped on the 1 and the 3 rather than on the 2 and the 4, like if you clapped on the downbeat rather than on the upbeat, either you were of Celtic origin or you were a Republican. Because everybody in America knows that you clap on the backbeat, not on the downbeat.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Hilarious.
That's how you can tell when you see all those old newsreels and you see people clapping to music, and you can't tell if the music might be out of sync with the video. You know whether if you assume that it is in sync, you know whether it was filmed in the U.S. or overseas based on whether the people are clapping on the 1 and the 3 or the 2 and the 4. Just throwing it out there.
Oh, right.
Hey, so Dave, what's getting on your goat, or what's hitting your fail list, or getting on your nerves?
There's plenty of things. What to choose. I mean, I as I mentioned earlier on my way in here on my bike.
What happened? Tell us what happened.
I was going to cross Apollo Road, and just riding down. Actually, sorry, I was on Apollo Road going to cross Brom Street, and just prior to that, some guy in his panel van came past me so close that I thought the wing mirror would have taken my elbow out. So he was, within a probably less than 30 centimeters of me. And it just so happened that we very shortly ended up next to each other at the light. And so I knocked on his window and I said, "Dude, that was really close." And he looked over at me, and he couldn't hear me because his door was closed. So I opened his passenger side door to tell him. And I said, "Oh, mate, that was miles away. I was miles away." And he said it sort of with one of those get stuffed type grins. So I just left his door open.
Nice.
And went back over to my spot on the side of the road to wait for the light to change.
Before we stray too far away from the cycling topic, I think I just want to give a big shout out to, I'm sure you know Katerina.
I do indeed.
She is trying to get to Detroit to a sort of a bike convention thingy.
Excellent.
And she's got a Give a Little campaign to help her get to Detroit, and she promises to, bring back some knowledge, but also represent Christchurch and sort of tell people the amazing things that are happening here. And then to bring back whatever knowledge she gets from Detroit and spread that here in Christchurch. If there ever was a position of bike mayor in Christchurch, I think Katarina would definitely own that.
Cycling
really?
has been long known to be a far better, what's the right word? Lubricant for commerce.
That's
so to speak.
That's always.
We got some lubricants for commerce in that paper bag just on the table, but we'll get to those in a little bit.
There's so much research and historical projects that prove that, and it just frustrates the hell out of me when we're in Christchurch and we see that kind of, that rhetoric, that kind of, it's really, really frustrating.